Hello and welcome to today's episode that will focus on the role of the external sector in India's development process. I am Deepti Taneja and teach at the Delhi College of Arts and Commerce, Delhi University. Today, we will look into what roles foreign aid, foreign capital and multinational corporations play in the process of developing nations, especially examining it in the context of the Indian economy. Since 1991, after India had globalized, there has been a dramatic increase in the corpus received from abroad for financial assistance. However, the role and effects of foreign financial assistance in the economic development of developing countries have always been controversial issues. Generally, foreign financial assistance is advocated as necessary for the promotion of economic development in the developing countries. The purpose of foreign assistance program to developing countries is to accelerate their economic development up to a point where a satisfactory rate of growth can be achieved on a self-sustaining basis. Thus, the general aim is to provide a positive incentive for maximum national effort to increase the developing economy's rate of growth. In this backdrop, today's episode will focus on the role of foreign financial assistance in the development process of the Indian economy. Today, we are going to focus on the following. First, understanding the various forms of foreign financial assistance, outlining the objectives of the foreign financial assistance program, analysis of the reasons of why donor nations provide financial assistance, understanding the need for the recipient country to accept foreign financial assistance, comprehending the role of MNCs and the FDI in India's growth process, and finally, understanding the counter-argument, that is, the critique of the foreign financial assistance program and the desired policy framework to be adopted by the recipient country. Foreign financial assistance come across in three ways. First, foreign aids and grants. The foreign aids and grants are free and are not to be returned. These can be in the form of goods or economic grants. Grants are considered as the most desirable type of foreign assistance since they represent a net addition to the resources available for development purposes without any corresponding increase in the recipient country's liability. Second is foreign loans. Foreign loans have to be returned. The loans can be bilateral or multilateral. Bilateral loans consist of capital provided by the government of donor to government or recipient countries, while multilateral loans consist of capital flows from multilateral organizations such as the World Bank and the IMF. These foreign loans come in two variants. First being the soft loans. The interest rate is very low and the time period allowed to return the loan is also long. Also, there are no strict instructions in terms of usage of these loans. Second are the hard loans. The interest rate is very high, the time to return the loan is short, and there are strict policies on the usage of the loan. The third form is the foreign investment. The foreign investment is brought into a country for business purposes. This investment can be undertaken by the government of the foreign country, in which case it is called as public investment, or it can be done by some private business house of the foreign country called as the private investment. Foreign investment too comes in two variants. First is the foreign direct investment. This refers to the net inflows of investment to acquire a lasting management interest in an enterprise operating in the economy other than that of the investor. It usually involves participation in management, joint venture, transfer of technology and expertise. Hence, there is a direct setting up of a multinational corporations or MNCs for short subsidiary in a foreign country. Second form is the foreign indirect or institutional investments called the FIIs. This involves investment in securities, equity or bond, real property and other investment assets without directly setting up a subsidiary or an industry in the recipient country. There are several motives for foreign assistance, both of the donor as well as of the recipient country. Developing economies usually have a shortage of foreign exchange which is needed for importing necessary capital and intermediate goods. External resources can play a crucial role in supplementing domestic resources in order to relieve savings or exchange bottlenecks. This is the theory of two-gap analysis of foreign aid. The two-gap model was presented by Hollis Chenry and A. Strout as an approach to economic development. According to them, most of the developing countries faced either one of the following: a shortage of domestic savings to match investment opportunities, that is the saving gap or constraint, or a shortage of foreign exchange to finance needed imports of capital and intermediate goods, that is the foreign exchange gap or constraint. In an economy where the demand of investment cannot be met entirely by domestically generated savings or through imports financed by the country's own export earnings, resources are transferred from abroad in the form of grants, loans or foreign investment. This is the traditional two-gap or dual approach to the analysis of the role of foreign aid in economic development, where foreign resources are assumed to fill both a saving investment gap as well as a foreign exchange gap in the recipient country. The foreign assistance raises the level of domestic savings by raising the level of income and exports, with the result that at some terminal date, foreign inflows are reduced to zero. According to this model, a recipient country passes through three stages on its way to self-sustained growth. First is the stage. The dominant constraint is that of absorptive capacity, that is, the economy is so primitive and backward that it cannot save and invest beneficially the minimum amount, that is 15% or so, necessary to achieve the required rate of growth. The purpose of foreign aid at this stage is to increase the absorptive capacity of the country by providing technical assistance, training, education, managerial ability, entrepreneurial talent and so on. Once the absorptive capacity of the economy has increased sufficiently, the constraint on growth is that of domestic savings. Therefore, the second stage is of saving constraint on the economy. A country with a low level of income and a large proportion of its population at subsistence level can hardly be expected to save 15 to 20% of its national income. The suggested way out is that foreign assistance may be used to supplement domestic savings and fill the gap between domestic savings and the investment required for a reasonable level of growth. During this stage, the saving gap will be greater than the trade gap and there may be some deficit balance of payment and high inflation as well. The third stage is that of trade constraint. As the economy grows, more and more inputs are required in the form of capital goods, industrial raw materials, etc. Exports cannot keep pace with increasing imports and the resultant difference between the two becomes larger and larger until it exceeds the difference between domestic savings and the required savings for investment. Therefore, at this stage, the trade gap is said to be the dominant constraint and the foreign assistance is now required to bridge this gap. At this stage, there is less need of foreign aid and assistance because as the economy develops further, rising levels of income result in an increase in savings as a proportion of national income until the required level is attained and the saving gap is closed. Also, as development proceeds, the first import substitution of consumer goods, then the import substitution of capital goods takes place, finally followed by the export of domestically manufactured consumer goods, with the result that the exports grow faster than the imports and ultimately catch up with them and hence the trade gap is also filled. With the filling of this gap, the need for foreign aid and assistance is now closed. The underlying economic objectives of foreign aid are therefore to alleviate poverty and increase savings, investment and rate of growth of GNP in developing countries. However, development assistance has not always succeeded in achieving these objectives because in many cases, donor motives for giving aid and recipient motives for accepting it conflict with the economic objectives of foreign aid. Thus, foreign aid is a complex term, especially when it is used to cover a variety of resource transfers from developed countries to the developing countries. We will now analyze the motives of the donor and the recipient countries for foreign assistance. There are several motives which inspire financial assistance from public bodies on concessionary terms such as humanitarian, political, commercial, military and economic. The objectives of most donors for grants and aids have an ingredient of moral obligation, stressing that social welfare should be promoted in the developing economies so as to decrease the disparity between the haves and the have-nots. Donors provide aid for moral and humanitarian reasons to assist the poor. Others feel obliged to compensate developing economies for the past exploitation and colonization. Developing countries accept assistance not only from national governments as a part of their regular aid program, but also from many voluntary and charitable organizations and from emergency and disaster relief funds. The thesis that nations extend aid out of a sense of sympathy and charity has been rejected by many economists as they believe that there are other reasons for which foreign aid is given. According to them, individuals may be humane and disinterested, but nations are not, because when people collect together to promote their own interests, they lose their sympathy for others. Many economists are of the view that the donor's primary motive for giving aid is political rather than moral and humanitarian. Indeed, countries like Turkey, Egypt, Greece and Israel are of geographical significance to the United States, and the available data points to the fact that these nations receive more aid than the normal. The political purposes have been to obtain strategic advantages and to cultivate the aspirations of the donor, such as democracy and communism, among others. The termination of the World War II witnessed the gradual emergence of liberated nations who required assistance for progress. The United States also used aid extensively during the Cold War to stop the spread of communism and reward friendly countries. It was felt that if the developed countries like the United States do not help nations which are determined to develop economically, they will turn to Russia. Therefore, it can be said that the decision to grant aid to another country is fundamentally a political decision. The economic objectives of foreign assistance are to induce high growth rates in developing countries, which in turn will generate additional domestic savings and investment. Hence, apart from political and military motives, there are also some commercial motives, because such a policy procures economic benefits for the donor countries. This is especially the case for loans, capital in the form of FDIs as well as tied aids. Tied aid, either by source, that is loans or grants have to be spent on the purchase of donor countries' goods and services, or by project, that is funds can only be used for specific projects, is a way to fulfill the commercial motives. Thus, the economic motive for developed countries investing in the developing countries is ostensibly to raise the growth rate of the developing countries, but it is in their own self-interest to raise their own welfare. The donor also gains if it is able to penetrate into the markets of developing countries' demand for goods and services of their home-produced goods. There have been numerous attempts to investigate the effects of foreign capital in terms of foreign direct investment, foreign aid and other foreign inflows on developing countries, but their results have been conflicting. It is well known that developing and least developed countries, at least until recently, have been very eager to accept foreign assistance even in its most stringent and restrictive forms. A primary motive for receiving assistance, especially in the forms of aid, is political, as foreign aid provides greater political leverage to the existing leadership to maintain its power and suppress opposition. Another major reason is economic. Foreign assistance, especially in the form of aid and loans, supplements the scarce domestic resources of developing countries. It contributes towards economy transforming structurally. It also contributes to the achievement of developing countries' takeoffs into self-sustaining economic growth. Therefore, the economic rationale for foreign aid in developing countries is largely on their acceptance of what they require to promote their economic development. Hence, conflicts generally arise not out of any disagreement about the role of foreign assistance, but over its amount and conditions too, because the developing countries like to have more assistance in the form of outright grants or soft loans with minimum strings attached. Moreover, the recipients use assistance for commercial reasons as they shift resources from their destined projects or programs to other non-productive purposes. This is known as the fungibility of funds. Fungibility of funds means that a borrowing country can put up its best projects to be financed by donors and then at the margin use the cash to finance other projects, so that what is enabled by the loan isn't necessarily what is put up to the donors to finance. It is argued that indeed foreign funds inflows are switched from productive purposes to non-productive or wasteful forms of recurrent expenditure. These include enlarging the army, paying off debts, reducing taxes and reducing borrowing. Furthermore, recipient motives are not always directed towards poverty alleviation and benefiting the poor. Recipient governments rarely target aid and loans to agricultural and rural areas. This is a contradiction in the stated objectives of assistance, which are primarily to alleviate poverty among the masses and an increase in the growth rates. Foreign assistance of the nature of foreign direct investment, that is FDI, by the multinational corporations or MNCs for short, has played an important role in the process of globalization in India during the past 2 decades. The rapid expansion in FDI by multinational enterprises since the early 90s may be attributed to significant changes in technologies, greater liberalization of trade and investment regimes, and deregulation and privatization of the markets. The host country aspires to receive FDI inflows because of the potential benefits, the most established benefit being that FDI supplements the domestic savings of a nation. Other payoffs include access to superior international technologies, exposure to better management and accounting practices, and improved corporate governance. FDI is likely to expand or to diversify the production capacity of the recipient country, which in turn is expected to enhance trade. On the other side, foreign investors are motivated by profits and access to natural resources. Therefore, large and growing domestic markets are likely to receive more FDI. Countries with abundant natural resources such as mines, oil reserves and manpower appear prominently on the investment maps of the foreign investors. Capital formation is an important determinant of economic growth. While domestic investments add to the capital stock in an economy, FDI plays a complementary role in overall capital formation and in filling the gap between domestic savings and investment. At the macro level, FDI is a non-debt creating source of additional external finances. At the micro level, FDI is expected to boost output, technology, skill levels, employment and linkages with other sectors and regions of the host economy. In India, the top FDI receiving sectors are the ones with strong backward or forward linkages with the economy. The sectors with strong backward and forward linkages include construction, fuels, chemicals and metallurgical industries. The sectors with strong backward linkages include electrical equipment, drugs and pharmaceuticals, food processing and textiles. Service sectors, telecommunications and consultancy services have strong forward linkages. There have always been fears that foreign firms might displace domestic monopolies and replace these with foreign monopolies, which may, in fact, create worse conditions for consumers. Thus, it is important to have an efficient competition policy along with sector regulations in place. An important question that arises is whether the FDI merely acts as a filler between domestic savings and investment, or whether it serves other purposes as well. to serve other purposes, the most important being boosting overall growth of the host economy. While the quantity of FDI is important, equally important is the quality of the FDI. The major factors that might provide growth impetus to the host economy include the extent of localization of the output of the foreign firm's plant, its export orientation, the vintage of technology used, and the research and development best suited for the host economy, employment generation, inclusion of the poor and rural population in the resulting benefits, and productivity enhancement. FDI plays a multidimensional role in the overall development of host economies. Besides capital flows, FDI generates considerable benefits. These include employment generation, the acquisition of new technology and the knowledge, human capital development, contribution to international trade, integration, creation of a more competitive business environment, and enhanced local or domestic enterprise development, flows of ideas and global best practice standards, and increased tax revenues from corporate profits generated by the FDIs. While FDI is expected to create positive outcomes, it may also generate negative effects on the host economy. The costs to the host economy can arise from the market power of large firms and their associated ability to generate very high profits, or by domestic political interference by multinational corporations. But the empirical evidence shows that the negative effects from the FDI are inconclusive, while the evidence of positive effects is overwhelming. That is, FDI increase has a net positive effect on the economic welfare of the host country. Little empirical evidence is available on the impact of FDI on the rural economy in general and on poverty in particular. Some economists conclude that FDI has positive effects on the poverty reduction mainly through three important ways, viz. The labor-intensive growth with export growth as the most important engine, technological, innovation and knowledge spillover effects from FDI-based firms on the local economy, and thirdly, poverty alleviation programs or projects financed by tax revenues collected from FDI-based firms. However, the host country's policies and institutions, the quality of investment, the nature of the regulatory framework and the flexibility of labour markets are important to attain the expected benefits to the rural poor from FDI. In India, FDI equity flows are concentrated in a few states. Of the total approved FDI flow, Maharashtra accounted for the largest proportion with 46%, followed by Gujarat and Delhi. Other states with significant and large investments were Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Among these states, only a few cities were involved in a significant amount of FDI. These included Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Kolkata, Chennai, Coimbatore, Goa, Hyderabad, Jamnagar, Kanchipuram, Mumbai, Pune and Raigad, indicating that the geographical flow of FDI in India is skewed in favour of relatively large cities. For all investments, it is regions with metropolitan cities that have the advantage in headquartering the country operations of MNCs, thereby attracting the bulk of FDI. Examining the industry-specific spillover effects, it has been observed that the pharmaceutical MNCs in India have made a positive contribution to the growth and development of the industry. Spillover effects through imitation, industrial management skills and competition were explicitly observed in the industry. Such effects were generated not only in product development but also in marketing and documentation technologies. The foreign firms' presence has indirectly encouraged domestic firms to increase their managerial efforts and to adopt some of the marketing techniques used by the MNCs. Further, the presence of foreign firms has intensified competitive pressure in the industry and stimulated domestic firms to use accessible resources more efficiently. India's comparative advantage in pharmaceuticals has boosted the Indian pharmaceutical enterprises to move and operate abroad. There are some who argue that foreign financial assistance has brought significant disadvantages to India. The first criticism connected with the foreign grants and aids program as well as with loans is that the developed countries and the multilateral agencies forward these funds with a number of conditionalities. Conditionality is a concept that describes the use of conditions attached to a loan, debt relief, bilateral aid or membership of an international organization, typically by the international financial institutions, regional organizations or donor countries. Conditionalities may involve relatively uncontroversial requirements to enhance aid effectiveness such as anti-corruption measures, but they may involve highly controversial ones such as austerity or the privatization of key public services, which may provoke strong political opposition in the recipient country. These conditionalities are often grouped under the label structural adjustment as they were prominent in the structural adjustment programs. Another criticism related to the FDI inflow into developing economies like India is that the MNCs bring those products to the markets that are not really desired to enhance one's welfare, and people tend to waste their money on such frivolous goods. Related is the criticism that MNCs often crowd out domestic Indian industries. However, literature suggests that the positive effects of foreign assistance outweigh these criticisms. The host country must ensure that a proper regulatory framework and domestic policies remain well in place that safeguard the domestic stakeholders against the possible ill effects. The antagonists as well as the advocates of the foreign financial assistance program have tried to judge its effects on savings, investment and growth in developing economies. However, there are many problems regarding the assessment of the effectiveness of this program. The effectiveness depends largely upon both the donor and recipient motives and how these may be aligned or conflicting with the objectives of assistance. This also depends on the extent to which assistance is tied to capital projects rather than being dispersed in forms such as food aid, balance of payment support and debt relief, which do not necessarily have any development component at all. Whether the recipient uses aid to increase savings and investment rather than switch aid resources to consumption and other non-productive purposes also determines the effectiveness of financial assistance. The role of FDI in enhancing the host nation's growth rate, generating more employment, diffusion of technology, resultant research and development undertaken and other such benefits were weighed against the possible negative effects. It was concluded that there are net benefits by having foreign investment in Indian economy. Finally, to conclude, it has been observed that the skepticism about the role of foreign financial assistance in reinforcing domestic growth has given way to greater openness to these funds with a view to supporting investment and productivity of the host countries. While developing countries have started accepting such inflows with some caution, they have also learned to take advantage of the present globalized scenario, and their investors too have moved their investments to foreign locations, subject to ensuring safety and profitability of their business operations in foreign lands. That is all that we have for today. Thank you. Have a good day.